I've always had a pretty antagonistic relationship with the concept of the work life balance. I started working the year after I graduated university at the age of 22, moved from my first job in sales into advertising, which was an industry I ended up working in for about 12 years after that. And if there's anything all those years in advertising taught me, it is that the concept, the idea, the benign affability of the work life balance that companies like to trot out during their interviews is all a big con, a big scam, an absolute lie, an utter waste of everybody's time, with an insidiousness at its core that is focused on companies telling said lie in order to take everything from you: your sanity, your family, your happiness, your future. Do I sound morbid? Defeatist? I'm sorry. But if there's any line I detest seeing for the lie it is work life balance. And what sealed that for me truly is the show Severance. Now, the first time I watched Severance, the concept of the show immediately intrigued me. This idea that one could sever a part of themselves and set self off to work for them and earn the income with which they would survive, whilst the other part of them gets to live without the burden of work. And I know a lot has been said about Severance commentary on how we as a society have started to push to separate our lives from our work, yada, yada, yada. But I watched the 2 seasons of the show, and what I got instead was that it is impossible to separate life from work. It is impossible to maintain true work life balance because work will always bleed into life and life would always bleed into work. But because our companies and jobs need us to console ourselves and deceive ourselves with this concept that a work life balance is possible, they would continue to push the narrative. Which for me led to me asking myself, why? Why must the work life balance, the lie of it, why must it be perpetuated and maintained in the workplace? Why do companies roll out the dreaded words anytime they are trying to recruit? Especially when, if one just looked at it at the surface, pushing for work life balance should naturally mean that you don't have workers slaving away at odd hours, which would ideally have contributed to the bottom line of the company, right? I mean, as someone who worked in advertising for over a decade, my first 6 years in the industry were spent working on a solitary brand, a telecommunications brand. Think Verizon. And the telco brand I worked on meant that I didn't get holidays and I didn't get weekends. I worked from 8 in the morning to sometimes midnight, would get up at past 1 a.m. only to be back at the office again by 8 a.m. If it was a good day, I would be home at say 9 p.m. So that's a 13-hour day. I didn't get weekends off, so I worked those same hours, Mondays to Sundays. I didn't get any holidays off, inclusive of banking holidays. So New Year's, Christmas, Independence Day celebrations, I spent them all in the office. That was where my youth went. And I, of course, did all of this whilst battling with mental health issues and holding on to anime and video games and books and TV shows as my only port in the storm in the few times I got to actually relax. I even had a direct supervisor who collapsed at work. Turned out he had high blood pressure and was also diabetic. The company responded by showing up at his hospital bedside with work for him to just quickly get done because it was an emergency and the client needed an immediate solution. So for me, the work-life balance spiel has always been a fallacy. However, I never really understood the why of it, why, even though it was a lie, capitalism still felt the need to push it as a narrative. What purpose did it serve, even though we know that it isn't really a thing? Well, with Severance, we got to see it explained through these characters, the various roles they served, all of which was to further Lumon's interest. Through the show's 2 seasons so far, we've got to meet different characters who, for varying reasons, chose to be severed. Mark to deal with the grief at the loss of his wife Gemma and the memories that threatened to drown him in their home. Dylan because he's always felt like he can't really hold down a job by being himself. And as such, he needs a better version of him that can actually settle down and keep the job they need to care for their family. Hervin's a bit tricky because clearly he chose to be severed not because he believes in anything the Egans and Lumon were pushing, but because he saw that job as the only way in which he could get the evidence he needed to bring Lumon down. Even though his severed self really didn't have any idea what was happening or what he was planning. Of course, I still buy into the theory that someone close to Irving, maybe a lover or his son, I'm not sure, not really sure, but I do believe that someone close to him had suffered the same fate as Gemma, and why Altie Irving kept painting that specific door. And I have theories about whether or not Eni Irving has been brought back prior to Mark and Dylan joining the team and was then restarted when he discovered the door. Something that his Eni subconscious forgot, but Altie Irving has traces of remembering. Unless Altie Irving has been Gemma in the past. Then there's Eleanor, who did it in order to gain her father's approval and contribute that severed experience to fulfill the goal of an Egan, willingly subjecting herself to the experimentation of the severance procedure in order to further promote it for both their supporters, detractors, and those who are hesitant about it and the role it serves. Clearly, she's doing her job as the scion of the Egan line to further the Lumon interest. That's the role LER is meant to serve for Eleanor and the outside world. And I know some of you might say it makes no sense for me to include Gabby Arteta in this list since she's clearly not a worker, but the show does read her as a stay-at-home type of mother who is married to an influential senator, and so one could say that her job and her duty in her marriage is to be a loving wife, to tend her home and to bear children for her husband. So just like the others, she does sever herself in order to get her job done, in order to handle the pain and changes of childbirth without actually going through the physical, emotional process itself. With this character, Severance drills in the work-life balance and why it keeps being maintained as a fallacy. It is to serve Lumon's corporate interests. You see, it's a psychological thing, something that has been stated to boost morale. In the paper, Impact of Work-Life Balance on Employee Productivity and Well-Being by Lucas Marecki, in the Journal of Management and Financial Services, this claim is made. Individuals who are capable of finding the right stability between their personal and professional lives are more likely to be committed to their organization, be more productive, and have better physical and mental health. On the other hand, workers who experience an uneven work-life equation may experience burnout, low job gratification, stressed relationships, and adverse impacts on their overall well-being. In other words, the work-life balance system boosts employee productivity and effectiveness, which serves the company. And if we agree that that has always been the primary concern of companies and corporations, then it falls to reason that the why for them always harping on the matter is because they are aware that somewhere in the subconscious of their employees lies the desire to maintain that balance before they can do their job well, which is what Lumon proposes, and we see reflected in this character's life. And so what they do is give an illusion of the work-life balance to pacify members of staff, so they can continue to chug along our work. And the one way to be certain of this is to always observe those higher up the ladder, i.e. those on whom rests the responsibility of supervising the work being done. Because I can guarantee that they often do not have a work-life balance and do not kid themselves that it is possible. Because unlike those lower down the corporate ladder, they know a lie and a spiel, and they know that it is only serving a certain interest, that of the business, so no one really gets it. It's why the supervisors on the severed floor aren't severed at all, whether it is Harmony Cobell, Seth Milchick, or Doug Rader. There isn't an off the clock with these three because there isn't really a need to lie and pretend about a structure that doesn't really exist with them. The higher up they go, the more they learn and know of Lumon's interests, which means that with them, Lumon doesn't need to pretend, and the same applies to the real world too. And before you mention that, well, technically, the team really does get to separate life from work, the question is that, do they really do? Ultimately, what the outies in the show have done is created subversions of themselves that end up living their own lives different from them. As much as they want to lay claim to the Enis, they can't really do so in the true sense of the word. Their innies might work for them, but their innies aren't really them. They are their own persons, and the work makes that really clear. When Dylan is out of a job and applying for work, we see that he almost gets work with a door company, which would have been really cool, until he admits to having worked for Lumon on their 7th floor, and the job offer is immediately not offered to him. One could read that scene as the owner being discriminatory towards Dylan, which is the truth. But I also read it as the fact that the knowledge gained from Dylan's work, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone outside of those in the know, because what exactly does the micro data refinery unit actually do? But be that as it may, the skills that Innie Dylan might have are ones that Outie Dylan can't lay claim to. He cannot talk about how his past years with Lumon have given him the experience to take on a new role because, to be quite honest, he has no memory of them. It isn't actually him. In creating a work-life balance, it doesn't benefit him at work. What Luman has done is take the words corporate slave that we often talk about those in business who are devoted to their work, and then they made it a reality. And as such, none of these characters are ever truly off the clock. Even their little accidents, for example, Eliar's orientation exercise that ends with Mark S being hit on the head, which ends up being a scar that hurts, that Outie Mark has to carry with him, wrapped under lies about what actually happened and empty platitudes in the form of a voucher for a meal. All of that speaks to this fact. The fact that the overtime contingency protocol exists speaks to the fact that even though these characters have no idea, their company has already created a way to intrude on sacred time that they should be spending with their family outside of work. And they can't do that without them having any recollection of it. Of course, this is an extreme, as that's not exactly how it plays out in everyday life, but having us being pulled into work for emergencies that could have otherwise waited or could have been brushed off affirms to the fact that, like with Severance, the work-life balance is what it is, a farce. You're allowed to have a life outside of work as long as your work allows it. And when your work demands otherwise, they have the power to pull you in, even at times when you otherwise should not be pulled in. And what they would dangle in front of you is often monetary compensation. Like money can ever take the place of what was taken from you at a time you should have been spending on yourself. Living. Neither Harmony nor Seth nor even Dog get the chance to separate work from their life because they are literally what awaits us in the upper realms in the corporate world. A system where life and work merge and become this nebulous spool that encompasses our entire being until the situation arises when we are spewed out after we've given everything we can to our work and left with neither work nor life, a la Harmony Cobell. Or maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just miffed because I see a lot of that trajectory for myself with my job, or I saw a lot of that trajectory for myself with my job, or rather my former job. And it's all just depressing. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share it if you want to. Support me on Patreon if you can. And until tomorrow's video, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.